This is the Shattering the Taboo podcast. Let's change the paradigm together with your hosts, Austin, Aesthetics, and Bebe Chez.
Okay, everyone, welcome to Shattering the Taboo podcast episode number 2, Psychedelics and the Psyche. Alright.
All right, I added a few kind of like bullet points of what we could cover. We had talked about kind of the history of it. We can talk, if you want, as well as the evolution of humanity as it relates to psychedelics. We can talk a little about that, kind of its origins, if you're interested, as well as some of the stigma, some of the historical, more modern day time, where some of these natural medicines have been lumped with really nasty stuff like heroin. And as well as we can get into some of the benefits and why it's a mega trend of this decade, how psychiatry, mental health is going to change because of the integration of not just psychedelics, but cannabis as well, which can, depending on the dosage or the type, can have some psychedelic effects. And we'll discuss why that is. If we have time, we can also parcel this out into another episode if we run short on time, because we don't want to make it over, too long.
Yeah, I think it's good to start with origin and the history of it. I think we should do that. And then we continue with potential benefits, but also, of course, risks, because it's not just one-sided. And I think it's very important that we are as reflected as possible in this regard, because, as we all know, they're also... it's not just so one-sided, so that will be very important. And at the end, I think this is the most important part, that we all share our experiences, because there are plenty of people, I'm sure, that have experienced that in their lives, and it will be very valuable to share that together.
Yeah, like you said, they can be somewhat dangerous. They are a very powerful force. They can do a lot of really good for you, but they could do just as much bad if you abuse them or misuse them or just don't know what you're doing. So definitely want to be careful.
Yeah, exactly. So does some of you want to start by maybe introducing the history or the origins?
If it's like with anything, we're talking about high technology. This is what natural medicine is, really Mother Nature is. It's high technology left behind by a civilization that we don't have much history, but if you do your homework, you can actually find the evidence for this. But if we're talking from a purely historical standpoint, then you would date back into the 4000 BCE era or so, and you start going into northern Africa and European regions. You'll find cave paintings, you'll find drawings of people and their experiences under psychedelics. And so people have actually come up with the idea that maybe humans came from a primitive being that discovered psychedelics maybe by accident. But if you want it, we can go into details as to why that's not really necessarily true, because it requires a knowledge of sophisticated chemistry for some of them that you would not have just by random chance, that you would just happen, like, for example, with ayahuasca, to be able to create the brew from different plants. And it has a really specific effect that shows that you have knowledge of chemistry. The interesting thing is that oftentimes people malign this without really a thorough understanding that our neurochemistry has many of these chemicals already built in. And this is almost like a way to accentuate that type of chemistry to allow the individual to experience more than the nervous system allows them to experience, to have certain creative and intuitive insights that further their development and could potentially as well enhance the development of a society or a civilization. That's why some feel that the advent of more modern man was triggered by some of these natural plants and or fungi. And so you can trace, even in the Americas, evidence of the use in indigenous cultures, even around that same time in the BC era, around, close to 4000 BCE. But of course, you start going, there's always like this certain gap in history where all of a sudden some of the use is gone. And then you don't see it again until, like, when you go into those dark Middle Ages, it kind of disappears. And then you don't see it again, but you see it now stigmatized. You see it kind of associated. I'm not going to mention any specific religion, but it's associated with specific religion, where now they're referring to the use as witchcraft. So it's associated now in a negative fashion. And so as we reach more modern times, it started to come back because, again, there's a renaissance as we move into this ascension phase in the evolution of man. We're now in the ascending phase again of this kind of cyclical view of nature that we can touch upon in a future podcast. As we ascend back, we start to rediscover things that were lost. Just like the idea that the world was round was known many, many thousands of years ago, because there are maps that date to at least 5 to 10,000 years in the past. You have kind of like source maps where somebody took an old map and created a newer version, and they keep creating a newer version where they depict things about the world that they shouldn't have known unless they were seafaring populations that knew that the world was round. But somehow people lost this concept that the world was round, only to rediscover it again. And we can get into details why that is. Why is technology lost? Why does society descend into darkness, only to ascend back out? And what we're seeing now is a complete shift. And somebody else, maybe Austin, can touch upon this with regards to, kind of like the hippie Nixon era of the stigma associated during that period, maybe what the CIA was doing and some of the stuff was going on that time. But now we're having a complete shift away from that, where now it's more based on science, medicine, enormous therapeutic benefits when it comes to PTSD, anxiety, depression, you name it, a lot of different areas. It is being also mixed, as we can discuss later, with actual therapy sessions with a trained professional. And I'm already seeing it moving into the digital space where I don't need to be with a physician, a psychiatrist, somebody with some sort of other training, psychological training. I can be virtually or eventually VR, kind of metaverse style, experiencing a therapeutic session with a trained professional in a safe setting under the influence of a medically dosed amount of a psychedelic.
Yeah, man, that's a really good point. And just like you mentioned about it being stigmatized, we have to ask ourselves why that is. Why does this stuff get stigmatized? And why in America? Because if you look at other places like Mexico, for example, they have a whole different culture, whole different belief system, and things like LSD, magic mushrooms were never really demonized there. And instead, they've been using it for therapeutic effects for a long time now. So it never really got stigmatized in some places, but in America specifically, it got heavily demonized. And like you mentioned with the Nixon era and the hippies and all of that, like it's a little bit political and immoral as to why it did get stigmatized, because it's not really based on science or fact. Even though I can understand some people who stigmatized it, they may have not done it for immoral reasons. They may truly have believed it was evil because they just didn't know the right information. Like back then, we barely had internet or like TVs in our house. We're not going to understand crazy ass things like psychedelics and how they affect the human mind. Psychology in itself, back in that Nixon era and everything, the 80s, it was still just becoming its own field. So we can't blame them too much for making those mistakes. But let me tell you a little bit of the bad truth behind the stigmatization. So we all know there was wars going on, and the Vietnam War, and America being there, it really didn't have much reasons to be there. It was a little bit of greed, a little bit of power games that were trying to be there and take over. So, like the hippies, of course, John Lennon, people like that, they protested it because they saw a lot of people just going into the war, being drafted and dying for the country, and minorities as well going drafting dying for the country when like it's still racist towards them and they don't even have full rights yet. Like there's still problems today. Back then it was way worse, right? And yet there's minorities being forced to go on the front lines, so it didn't really make sense. And these people realized that, like, why are we fighting these wars for these people in power and just giving our lives for nothing? And they protested it. A lot of these people protesting, they also used things like marijuana, LSD, psychedelics, and maybe that's why they protested this stuff. Maybe that's why they realized this stuff was messed up. Because if you smoke weed, you know, anyone like Bob Marley, they smoke, they chill out, they want to relax. You know, they're not ready to go to war. So these kind of substances, they kind of make you not really want to hate on other human beings. They kind of connect you back to Earth and to each other. And so they ended up banning them and making them illegal to not only target those protesters, because then they were able to arrest them. Like protesting in itself was not an arrestable offense, it wasn't illegal. So they could protest it and get people to turn against the wars and persuade public opinion. That was all legal. So they had to make a reason to arrest these protesters. And once they demonized the drugs that they used, bam, they had the perfect reason. But it wasn't only to arrest those people, it was also to influence the human psyche. They wanted to influence the citizen's psyche and how they thought. Because any substance you ingest, let it be a drug, let it be food, let it be caffeine, psychedelics, weed, cigarettes, anything you ingest into your body is going to affect your mind. It's going to affect you. And the government wants to pick and choose what you can ingest into your body so that it can pick and choose how your mind is being affected. If they know that these psychedelics and marijuana and things are going to make people not support the war or make them quote unquote lazy or not want to work a 9 to 5, not want to work in a factory or work or be in the mindset that the government wants them to be, then they're not going to allow them to use those things. So I think it's a lot of people are confused and they really believed it was evil because all the propaganda that was going on the media, the televisions, like they didn't know anything about psychedelics, and then they had the government and the media pushing propaganda, making it seem dangerous, making it seem like there's no place for it, like it's literally just a heroin drug or something like that with no benefit, no reason to it. And they would also say it was addicting too, which, if any of you have done psychedelics, you know they are not addicting. If you guys have read the literature and the research, you know it's been found to be non-addictive at all. So there really was no reason for all the demonization. But hopefully now we can reverse some of that and tell you guys the truth behind it.
Yeah, I like that you touched on like the most recent attack, which was like the Vietnam era, on psychedelics specifically. But I think it delves deeper than that when we look at like the establishment of our current medical system. And one of the main proponents of that system was John D. Rockefeller, right? I think we're in a stage of rediscovery, as Baby Ches touched on, when it comes to like holistic health and shamanistic understanding. So before Rockefeller established this medical system that we currently use, where a lot of the processes that um, make and establish the medicines that we ingest are focused on like the petroleum industry. That was a for-profit practice. Before that, there was an emphasis on like holistic healing and an understanding of natural medicines. And those natural medicines were attacked initially for profit, to establish a system that we currently are still taking part in. So although the Vietnam War was the most recent attack and most strongly against like psychedelics, it goes way deeper into our historical roots. And I'm glad that we're talking now to kind of break down the walls and barriers surrounding the psychedelics in particular, because they have been used as natural medicines and remedies, and also as like rites of passage for men and women coming of age in different ancient societies.
Mm, yeah. Um, Personally, I think it's interesting. I feel like there's a huge, powerful force, and it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what that force is. It's very sort of abstract, but somehow integrated into the governmental body in some way. And you mentioned Rockefeller. I think there are many powerful people that see this whole era, or just this. I I mean, we can talk about a revolution, right? This is potentially revolutionary. This this
Oh
word
yeah.
usage, um, this psychedelic, um, it's a huge paradigm shift, and for people that want to maintain, they want to um, keep this framework in society fixed. It is very much materialistically oriented, right? It is based on greed, it's based on craving and attachment to materialistic values, let's say money, let's say we mentioned the pharmaceutical industries who want to make money as much as possible from the medications that they sell, right? And they want to most likely make sure that people keep on taking these medications so that they can keep like continue earn from people, when they are sick. So it's good. It's more or less, you could say, I think, that it's good for these people that the society is sick so that they can profit of people, to cure them, and they want to make sure that this remains um, the way in society, that there is, in the best way possible, no cure, because otherwise, where would that profit be for these people, for these pharmaceutical industries? Um, how could they continue to fulfill their needs for materialistic things if people would have completely different orientations? If people would not, and this is something that I feel is true in my own view, um, people that have psychedelic experiences, they tend to go away from this materialistic, capitalistic orientation, where we're just focused on consuming and consuming and consuming, because we realize that consumption is not fulfilling. It is just creating another hole in our heart, and it can never be filled, right? It can never be filled because it's always temporary. Um, the hedonistic pleasures that we feel when we live this materialistic lifestyle. So I think that's a big reason why it's so stigmatized, because it threatens the whole underlying corpus, or framework or reality that um, a couple of powerful institutions and people want to maintain.
That it's interesting that
Great
you
points.
mentioned the pharmaceutical side, because when I mentioned that psychedelics are a mega trend of this decade, and I'm invested in a number of companies related to both cannabis and psychedelics. I don't hide that. I see the pattern. But when I dig deep into many of these companies, they have a pharmaceutical kind of angle to them. They're looking to take what the natural medicine has and they want to tweak it and create some sort of like pill format that is then studied and used. And they're trying to like take something natural and make it a little bit more natural. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's probably better than some of the dirtier technologies that we're exposing ourselves to on a day-to-day basis. But there's no doubt that if you look at the history during this era of the prohibition era that lasted, somewhere about 80 years or so until the early 1970s, a lot of conservative views, a lot of war on drugs that really made people hesitant to try that. I remember when I was younger, I had friends who were very against it, and they would try certain things, but they'd be, I'm not dabbling in that. That's too much. There was like this built-in program already where they would think already negatively about certain things. And I think that this is the goal of this podcast, is to really start to destroy some of those barriers, to shatter what certain limiting beliefs that we may have about ourselves, about society, about whatever it may be. And we'll try to kind of guide you as best as we can with that. Anybody, let's see, anybody here has any questions before we continue? Want to come up?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to quickly say, feel free to raise your hand, become part of our discussion, if there's something that you have to ask, that you want to ask or contribute.
Yeah, like I think the point that Bogi was making is very important, is that the use of natural medicines, whether it's cannabis, variety of different psychedelics, there's not just psilocybin based, but other kinds, they undermine the promise of modern, so-called modern medical discoveries. And therefore, it puts the future of that industry in question. And if we look at, and we're not going to get to this right now, but what is the source of a lot of the mental and physical problems that we have? They're inherent in the system. I talked about this yesterday in a podcast that I did, where the system that we built, both in governance or law, financial, and social, are out of sync with nature. And as long as they're out of sync with nature, they lead to problems. We're out of balance. And then we seek different things in the exterior to try to fix that. If the financial is causing me to have financial problems because of the system in place, I'll try to seek out some financial gain somewhere. Maybe I get into gambling, let's say. If I'm having some instability feeling emotionally or mentally, I may seek out something else. Some people may seek out food or sex or drugs or whatever. And it's always in a misguided way. There is another way to fix the problem, but we have to fix it by the systems that we have in place. And we need to get in line with Mother Nature. And as these natural offerings that Mother Nature offers to us, there is also the opportunity to take the filter that the nervous system has that limits our sense of awareness and open the door to certain avenues that we don't have open right now. But as we may get to today or in another session, sometimes opening that gate can lead to us discovering or confronting things about ourselves that we may not want to confront.
Yeah, the healing process can be like that, especially with psychedelics. If you have a big problem in your life, the only way to solve it is to face it head on, honestly. And sometimes doing that can be very scary and very traumatic for some people, especially under a psychedelic influence. Your demons can literally pop up as like a hallucination or just a bad trip, and then it gets really scary. But if you can fight through it and work through that hard time, you will come out on the other side stronger and healed. If you just work through it, you have to put in the work and get a little bit dirty, do a little bit of what Carl Jung, a famous psychiatrist, psychologist, would call shadow work with your psyche. You have to do a little bit of shadow work, looking into that part of yourself that you don't like, that part that you may repress, because that's where your weaknesses are, your fears, your insecurities, the things you need to fix and work on. You got to look there to improve yourself and to heal. And sometimes these things are subconscious. You may not even know them consciously. You may not even know what the problem really is. And something like a LSD, a psychedelic that blurs the lines between the conscious and subconscious of your perception, they can help you bring those hidden things that you're not even aware of that are inside of you to the surface, so you can then look at them and then figure them out, remap your brain around them, your subconscious around them, and clear them through your subconscious, or just configure a new way in your mind so that they're no longer subconsciously dragging you down or causing you issues. Because sometimes we don't know everything, and taking these psychedelics, they can reveal things about ourselves that we didn't really know from a sober state of mind.
Yeah. I think that's a very good transition to potential benefits. So maybe we can talk a little bit about benefits of using psychedelics. And there are certainly different psychedelics. So
Yeah.
maybe.
I know one big thing that has a lot of research backing it is how psychedelics influence the psyche. You guys may have heard of the big five personality traits, and our psyche, it pretty much is our personality, or that's a big part of it. So the big five personality traits are pretty much the biggest five characteristics that make up one's personality. Like, I'm sure you've all heard extroversion, introversion, also known as openness to like new experiences. So psychedelics, LSD specifically, has been found in studies to increase one's openness after using it, actually by one whole standard deviation, which is like a measurement away from the average. One standard deviation is a very significant change. That is a very statistically significant change that you would notice in your life, and people may notice about you. So this isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing, because no, you can't really say being more open or less open or more extroverted or more introverted is good or bad. They both have a time and a place, pros and cons. But it is very interesting, and it shows the power of these psychedelics when you realize the research shows that they can literally change your personality and make someone a little more extroverted, make them more open to new experiences, and also creativity, because openness, that trait also has to do with one's creativity as well. And I
Mhm.
theorize that this may be beneficial for certain populations, such as those dealing with types of anxieties, things like agoraphobia, maybe, or other types of anxieties, because if you can, normally those people are overly introverted, right? Or overly neurotic. So if you give them the psychedelic and it makes them more open, increases their extroversion, then maybe that would decrease their agoraphobia, their anxiety, their resistance to new experience, their resistance to change, their fear of that. If they become more open, they'll have less fear of change and less anxiety overall. So that is a potential benefit. If you are someone dealing with that, it could make you more open.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a wonderful positive aspect. It increases interconnectedness, right? So whenever we think about, so as I learned it personally, I come from a slight like Buddhist tradition, more or less. Um, and the Dalai Lama often says there is. He often talks about destructive emotions and constructive emotions, and the difference between the two, as Austin already kind of hinted at. Openness would be more on the constructive side. It is connected with other people. Um, it invites new things and welcomes new things without being too anxious of it. Um, Whereas the destructive emotions, they're really I-based. They're really based on the ego. And oftentimes these are the emotions that are isolating ourselves. And we all know it, right? We all experience it. We are all human. We all had these emotions already, and we know exactly what they do with us. They isolate us, and it's a state that is really unpleasant, because we sort of deny or reject the experience that we currently have. We try to distract ourselves or run away from the situation that we find ourselves in. This is often associated with destructive emotions. Um, but if that is shattered and we find a way to engage with our circumstances or with people in a very open way, in a very curious way, I think that is definitely enhancing the well-being of an individual. And I think this is a huge aspect why I would say that um, becoming more open is in correlation, and if not even maybe like causally related to being a more happy person. I think this is a very, very important aspect. And this is, I'm not making a statement here, right? Because this is what I personally think, so it might be wrong, but it's definitely something to think about. I think that's something that each one of us should or could contemplate upon. What are the situations that we suffer in, right? Is do it's mostly a situation where we isolate ourselves from other people and become very I-based and immersed and self-conscious, as opposed to being connected with our whole surroundings.
Yeah, man, great points. And that's something too I've realized in my own personal experience is it definitely did make me more open and also kind of more connected to people. It kind of made me understand the universality of people and let me see myself in everyone, because you think about it, when I had some trips, I kind of realized we're all pretty much the same. We're all pretty much in the same position on this earth for the most part. Of course, we have sort of things that we separate ourselves with, like how much money people make. We separate ourselves with a category like that, or how attractive someone may be. 1 to 10, we separate ourselves with a category like that, or race, or gender, or work field. There's just so many like things we hold in our mind that are just invisible, made up, unnatural categories that can make us feel separated from people, and like no one is similar to us. But what these psychedelics break down is a lot of people end up having similar experiences to them, and we're affected the same way by them. And that just kind of made me realize, like, when I'm tripping with my friends or a group of people, it's like we're all on one wavelength. It's like we're all connected mentally somehow. We're all on the same vibe. We're all being controlled the same by the same thing in a way. And it really does make you feel connected, like you're more than just yourself. You're part of the human race. You're part of a group of people. And it's crazy because you can even see it like manifested in people who are at raves and things. Like, I was at a music festival last year and people were tripping on LSD, who knows what else, but I swear hundreds of people were moving in sync to the beat of this song. It was like the music just took us over and no one was even thinking about it. But you just see everyone moving in the same fucking way, like it was choreographed. But it's just a bunch of strangers in the woods under this influence. And we're just all on the same vibe, just moving in sync. It's like a colony of ants, how they can move as one unit but in human beings. And it's crazy to think that our minds have that like capability to have like a hive mind, become part of a group and work in unison like that. But it's hard to reach that point when we're separated by all of these egotistical conscious barricades that society sets up and puts in our minds from a young kid. But it's great because these psychedelics can break down all of those barriers and dissolve the ego and let you realize you're part of the universe, you're part of the environment, you're connected to all these people. This perception is something I think Sigmund Freud called an oceanic view or oceanic perspective of the world, where instead of thinking I'm the center of my universe, I'm a little tiny ego between my eyes inside of my head, like how most people think they are. They think they're this little tiny thing in between their eyes and their head. They're just this tiny little thing and everything's kind of around it. No, the oceanic view is like you have a wide lens view and everything you see in your vision is just part of you. You don't know what's separate from your body and what you're seeing. It's all just one. Like how a kid is. A kid doesn't know his hand is separate from the background. It's all just one together. And that's something we're born with. We're born with that type of perspective. But over the years, over the teachings of society and the norms, we lose that view. We lose that connected feeling to our environment and nature and people around us and develop the I, the ego, you know, for better or worse. That's what happens. But these psychedelics, they can break that down temporarily and even long term in some people if they have a good moving experience and sort of bring that oceanic view back to us.
I've been doing research in this mental space for a very long time. And I have experienced just both personally and, of course, working with other people that there's a very fine line between genius and what people would call instability or mental illness or insanity. And a lot of the problem is stigma. I've had people that I know for a fact that they had what people now would focus on as some sort of psychiatric problem, whether it's Tourette's, ADHD, what have you, anxiety or PTSD. And if you take two people that grew up with similar struggles, but you have one family that's a lot more supportive, that doesn't point out the mishaps and the problems and the negative stuff, that child ends up thriving more. And I have a friend of mine who I really admire a lot that went to Yale with me, and he ended up being very successful in life and top of his class. But when he was younger, he really struggled with a lot of problems. And I look at like the shamanic tradition, or a lot of these indigenous traditions that have dabbled in natural medicines and psychedelics for a good part of their history, and they embrace it as part of their culture. They elevate people with psychic abilities, and they put them in a position of power. And very soon I'll be unveiling some of these new ideas where you're going to see that what we often in America or in modern world think of as being a problem, being mental illness, is actually a gift when channeled and understood correctly. And what we need to do is a very intensive educational program where people don't feel disconnected. They feel understood and empowered and elevated. And when they do, and I've noticed from working with many people, a vast range of mental health conditions, where when they get to that point where they understand what they're feeling or what they're going through and how they can use it to actually serve others, the difference is almost night to day. And for somebody to say, like we were talking about earlier about the stigma, to say that a person that uses psychedelics, that there's something wrong with them or that they're not well in the head or what have you, well, it's completely wrong, because some of the most successful people, authors that have been so influential, and we can list many, and also people that are doing work in a therapeutic area, all have experience with psychedelics, and so, or cannabis. And so I want you to really understand that you are not alone, that any struggle that you may go through is normal and fine. And we often get stuck focusing on the wrong things about ourselves. And we sometimes get timid or afraid to open the bandwidth, which psychedelics can do, even cannabis can do. They can open that bandwidth and allow certain things that we often suppress or ignore, or we add on to our consciousness. We add noise by keeping ourselves busy. We don't want to turn around and look within. And it's a lot of things that sometimes come out. And this is why I often emphasize being very mindful with where you do it. Environment is very important. mindset is very important. Sometimes getting to a certain level of maturity is important. And of course, having the right network or support, sometimes being in a good group. I think, Austin mentioned some of that connectivity dynamics. Or it could be that I take a trip and I'm with people in some sort of place, and maybe in South America with a shaman that's experienced, that is very wise. If you speak to them, they absolutely normal and wise and powerful being. And in that scenario, actually very important healing can occur. But if not ready, it can also lead to other problems. You have to be very mindful when you approach this, to really do it in a careful way, like anything in life. Don't push yourself. Don't do anything that maybe goes in conflict with somebody that's already currently working with you at a therapeutic level. You want to be very careful not to throw away something that you're doing, because if I'm already dependent or using a certain drug, let's say pharmaceutical, and I all of a sudden stop cold turkey, like stopping anything in life, your body is not adapted. It gets adapted to certain circumstances. And we have to be very careful when we do anything. Be very skilled, gentle with yourself, and take an approach with yourself that is very loving. And so think about that as you learn in this space, that we're growing now in a different circle. These spaces, I'm finding an opportunity for people to really find others that are having the same struggles. Oftentimes I hear that people just struggle with similar issues, and know that we create a podcast like this to have these discussions, for you guys not to be timid, your family. Come on, share an experience, ask a question. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue to share some of my experience with the psychedelics, specifically psilocybin. I have been interested for a long time, for years actually. One of my best friends had done them. He's done a couple heroic doses, and that was back in 2014, 2015. From that time, I was interested, but I knew that it wasn't the time for me. Um, I just wasn't in the right space. It seemed like it was pressing and unnatural to me. Um, it just wasn't. It didn't resonate as well with my being as it did when I decided to discover them and experiment with them. And in my time of experimentation, I didn't just take a handful of mushrooms. I really studied out the amount that I should take, um, the effects, how long it would. I made sure that I was completely comfortable with what I was about to embark on. I know that some people can just do it casually, like they just take a couple grams of mushrooms and enjoy the ride. But I didn't take that approach. I was very methodical because I had intentions behind what I wanted to discover, what I wanted to do, what I wanted them to be. And it was a conduit of healing. So my first time, I took uh, close to a half a gram of mushrooms. And I set an intention before. I said I want to explore, I want to be more creative, and I want to have an intrinsic journey. And that's exactly what I experienced on my first um, dosage of psilocybin. Everything that I intended beforehand, I I experienced within myself. And like Austin touched on earlier, it's that that intrinsic journey can get dirty, it can get dark. And I did have moments where I had to pull myself out. I had to do a comforting something that I was comfortable with in order to uh, uh, get away from that dark hole. Um, but I went in and I did some work, and I came out on the other side more whole, more in tuned. I went to work the next day and I had a different perspective. I used to work with young men who had developmental disabilities and severe developmental disabilities. Oftentimes they couldn't even speak. But I found the next day that they could express themselves more strongly and more fluidly with me, although nothing had changed. The only change that I made in my life was that I ingested this psilocybin the day before. But suddenly I was more aware. Suddenly I was more in tune with these guys that I had grown accustomed to over time. And their nonverbal communications was sharper and cleaner. I could understand what they were trying to say. So that's just one simple experience that I've had with psilocybin and how profound it was. Um, and I continue to dabble and have fun when I feel intuitively led. It's not something that I regiment into my daily life, but it is something that I'm so so comfortable with.
Where would you rank your experience with mushrooms in your life? Like, would you say it's a top 20, top 15, top 10, top 5, like, influential experience or like good experience that you've had in your life? Where would it rank? Was it something important?
Um, I would say that it's probably in the top. It was a good thing. I can't put like a number ranking on it, honestly. But it was an overall good thing, and it came during a time when I was already propelling myself forward. It was just something that catalyzed a new level of growth, a new expansion of consciousness, essentially. So it was an
Nice.
overall good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I asked because I was reading and I remember seeing that a lot of people who reported psychedelic things, they said that the experience was among one of the like biggest life changing moments in their life. But this only applied to people doing mushrooms who had a mystical, magical experience with them. Like, not everybody who does a dose will have a hallucinogenic trip or a magical type experience. So, those people, they didn't report those effects or they didn't report the benefits either. But for some reason, when people have like a magical, mystical experience with these substances, it really moves them and they rate it very high on overall experiences.
Yeah, I would say that it was a reminder towards a mystical or spiritual experience that I had earlier on in my life around 2013. And a lot of those truths that I discovered abruptly over it's actually been a nonstop journey since then. Um, but you get bogged down, you get dirty, you get miry, and can forget. I tended to forget some of the lessons that I learned, and when I took those mushrooms, it was a reminder of the beauty of life, of the spiritual essence of being, and all of the positive things that you can think of spiritually. It was a reminder of those things. Of course, I had to confront some of that darkness, but and get it out of my system and kind of clear up some bandwidth. But yeah, it was just a reminder more than a new mystical experience that unlocked some new framework. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and you made another good point saying that you were in the mindset where you were like doing some self improvement or like propelling yourself forward, and you also set your intention before the trip, which is a very big thing. That's just something like everything is amplified. So you want to make sure you set the intentions like Jaime did and set good intentions because your intentions will be amplified. If you go in a little nervous, unsure of yourself, that's when a bad trip's going to happen because that anxiety, that fear is going to be amplified. And once it starts going, it's like a spinning spiral and it can just get worse and worse unless you know some techniques or methods to pull yourself out of that downward spiral of negative thought patterns. So if you know that, you're good. And if you go in with a good positive mindset and good environment, you will be good and you'll have like a really great experience.
To build off of what you said, Austin, I think that psychedelics are such a potent tool and they have been demonized for such a time that a lot of people do have that anxiety. And for those people that have that anxiety, I wouldn't encourage them or recommend them to
Mm.
experiment with them. I would encourage them to research, to have conversations like this, to listen to different resources. Terrence McKenna is one of the best resources when it comes to like psychedelics. There are plenty of like podcasts out there that you can go to and have open conversations, right? Um,
Mm.
if you have that anxiety, like Austin said, it will be amplified. So the tool, it is a conduit by which you can do a lot of good inner work, but you have to be careful. It's a potent tool. It's something that you're
Yeah.
not used to. It's something that you're not used to ingesting. You don't do it every day. So
Mm.
it must be approached with respect and reverence. And when you do that, you can have very, very positive effects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to mention from a therapeutic standpoint to be very mindful of one thing. Most of our pain and suffering are carried with us every day. Remember, thoughts, emotions, experiences are energy. We draw them through the senses, and we either allow them to flow through us, or we hold on to them, or we push them. We wrestle with them, we create resistance. And in that wrestling and resistance, or not understanding the experience that I had, oftentimes we store up this negative energy, which takes life and form. I've seen this clearly in various people I've worked with. They can take form as masses and structures. In Sanskrit, it's called a samskara, or a psychic scar. Scars come in different forms. It could be physical, it could be mental or emotional. And therefore, those that we don't see physically, I can see a scar, and then Rafiki can come up. Those scars that I see on my body, I recognize, like, oh, it's an old wound, whatever, and I kind of let it go. But those that are deep that I don't often think about are the ones that I carry with me all the time. It's like this dead weight that I'm just carrying with me in a sack behind me. And the so-called negative experiences that you may have when under the influence of some sort of natural medicine is often that reserve that I have in there that I am suppressing and keeping in the background as I do stuff in everyday life. So Ability, who was here earlier, brought up in a previous spaces that we had the use of non-psychedelic means to have a similar experience in these kind of isolation water tanks, where you go into this kind of dark tank in water, you're isolated from sound, from sight, and now you cannot do one thing that is constantly suppressing all of that from coming into the forefront, of your mind, which is there is no stimuli from the senses, there isn't any noise. And therefore now the inner sounds, the inner experiences start to come out. And those can trickle into my consciousness and can be a little bit overwhelming if I don't process them correctly. And I can struggle with it. And I'll have a hard time letting it go. And therefore, there's often times where people have negative experience. And I know various people in my life that have dabbled and then have had negative experiences. I've never touched it again. And it's unfortunate that you have to remember, you have to be brave. Bravery is key in the spiritual or contemplative tradition pursuit. If I really want to get to know myself, I have to turn around and face the darkness. I have to face the things that maybe I'm ashamed of. We all have that. And when I turn around and I look in that mirror, that inner mirror, I must be comfortable enough to really look at it, analyze it, tease it apart, let it go, overcome it, grow stronger. And when I do, when I come out the other end, I'm going to be more polished. I'm going to feel more connected, freer. And it's going to allow me now to resonate at a higher frequency, opening the door to new possibilities. Yes, Rafiki, glad to have you come on board. How are you, sir?
Yeah, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Appreciate this forum, man. It's a good one. I have a meetup group locally where I live that did this, but I never really joined or went to it. And I've been into the deprivation tank, like a sensory deprivation tank, like you were just talking about, and it was amazing. And I've actually done some LSD trips when I was younger, probably in my teens and early 20s, and it did help me out, but it was again in the bad environment, not in the right mindset. So now that I'm older and have access to it and have done some recently and have some more, but I want to do more of the guided one, not necessarily in a controlled, like what the other guy was talking about, like I guess journaling would help. But my question is, do you have some kind of like as you're going through the trip, some kind of guided uh, way to pull out all of the subconscious uh, hurting or things that are holding you back or intention settings that you would recommend for someone that wants to kind of like uncover those with on our own rather than through a guided tripping meditation in some kind of like psychiatric or shamanistic sense. So
You mean like a recording? Like some sort of like thing
I
that you
mean, it
listen
doesn't
to,
necessarily have to
or an
be.
actual session?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be a session. Do you have something that you could do like on your own? Like if I'm
Hmm.
sitting at my house and I want
Mhm.
to discover some of the hidden
Uh, I,
hurts.
I could make a suggestion. I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying like if you're solo tripping alone
Sure.
without any video or any like experienced teacher, but you want to get a therapeutic beneficial experience out of it, like what should you do?
Correct. Yeah, I've listened to Terrence McKenna before, and Paul
hmm
Stamets as well for the psilocybin. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would say do what Jaime did, and kind of what I have done too, is really all you can do is set the intention and figure out when you're sober, clarify in your mind what exactly you want out of the trip. If you don't have it very clear and clarified, you may not even really know. You may have like a foggy idea, but if you really don't know deep down, if you just say some general thing like, oh, I want to heal, that what does that mean? What does that translate to when you're tripping? Oh, I want to heal. Like, you got to clarify it, be a little specific with it. And there's ways you can do that, such as writing it down. You could journal, or you could just simply write a sentence or two stating your intentions in a clear, concise way, getting to the root of it. Then when you are tripping, you can read what you wrote, go over those things, and just meditate on your exact clear intention. Just read what you wrote, sit there in your thoughts in the trip, looking at the words move, looking at the paper move, and whatever happens will happen. At that point, you just have to let go and ride the experience. And if you feel yourself getting off track, just gently nudge your attention back to your intentions and focus on that.
Sure, I get that, but what if it's a hidden subconscious, something that you're not aware of that you can't set an intention to?
You might not be aware now, um, but it might also be something that takes multiple sessions. Um, it's not like the end all be all to experience have one mushroom experience. For some people it is. For some people it's not. Um, but I would say you're already in the right mindset, the right frame of mind where you want to go in and do some of this shadow work or enter into deeper parts of your consciousness or your psyche. I would on the first session, I think I would just intend like I want to dig deeper, I want to uncover. You tell yourself that, and then you ruminate on that, you meditate on that, and then when you're prepared, you take your substance. And I think that not trying to force yourself or dictate the direction of the trip, you allow the substance to take you and show you what you need to see. You might just go for a walk, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, look at that ripple in the water. Look at that. And a profound insight could come forth from that. Um, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
you're already in the right space, in the right direction. It
Sure.
just takes that concise effort.
Yeah, I've done meditation before, not necessarily on like a regular daily basis, and perhaps that's what I need to do is cultivate that a little bit more. I think I'm pretty self aware in terms of my body and my feelings and emotions. It's just the underlying subconscious things that it's what you don't know that what you don't know. So I think that's kind of what I'm trying to uncover,
Yeah.
things that are holding me back, and kind of like just things that are holding me back, I guess.
Yeah, it's very true. You're very right in saying they're subconscious, right? So that's why I don't know them. If I would know them, they wouldn't be subconscious.
Sure.
I think yeah, what you said is perfectly right. I think patience is really important. Accessing subtle levels of our mind that go below the surface level, they take a lot of time. And I feel like I meditated for years and years, and sometimes it just seems like nothing really happened, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy to think. I think the layers are just so packed. The layers are so thick that it seems very difficult. But many of the teachers that I follow, they always advise, and this is very helpful for me personally: be patient, continue to put in effort, be courageous, as Brian said. I think this is one of the most important things, to have the willingness to face the deficits of our minds with a courageous attitude, and having the attitude, the effort, and the intention. Those are already huge steps that will lead us into the right direction. Now we just got to put in the work, be patient, and trust the process, and then we will get there eventually.
I think Bogey hit a very important point, is that we often seek experiences that may not be ideal for us. It could be a little hasty. Building the right foundation and base is key. All that psychedelics do is to start to open your consciousness to higher dimensions that are hidden to you. The subconscious realm is one of those dimensions, and it's the first veil, layer, or barrier that blinds you and prevents you from experiencing the light of who you really are. And this is why I always say that to experience the light, you must confront the darkness. And this is why when I work with younger kids and I teach them a certain routine of yoga, I always build into their mentality a warrior mentality. It's that fearlessness. It's like being a teenager, that you're willing to try something, you're willing to go down that half pipe, even if you're gonna break a bone. You're not afraid to see what you're gonna happen. And the other thing is I want to mention is, I forget who talked about this, is expect the unexpected. It's not just with psychedelics. I've worked in other scenarios in the mental health and wellness space and spirituality space. People come in often expecting one thing. And what really happens is, especially when you're talking about natural medicines, they have a way. This is why in South America, they talk about ayahuasca as a mother, as almost like a spiritual entity that has this wisdom to be able to draw out exactly what you need. And all you need to do is to learn to be receptive, fight the ego fears, allow the mind to rest, and allow the experience to pass like a cloud. Observe it, see what it's trying to teach you, almost like having a lucid dream where you're seeing it in third person. See where you are at fault, or where you're holding on to something, or where you're struggling. And then in that process, you're going to realize that all the answers, all the wisdom, all the things that you need are already within you. And you're going to start to dissolve it slowly. Of course, it could be that it's helpful to do it in a setting like I described earlier, with somebody who's skilled. But somebody who's skilled is not somebody who maybe just practices psychiatry or psychology and really doesn't know about this. It has to be somebody who's a little bit more, I guess, holistic, well-versed in this area. And what I'm seeing already is a big trend is training in this area. We're training more professionals to be knowledgeable about psychedelics, cannabis, and its applications in terms of mediated therapies that are going to emerge in the future.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it. I think the next one I think I'm going to do it alone because typically I've done it with other people, and I don't think that gives a good, introspection or doing like mirror work or anything like that, or facing the dark demon. So, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Rafikiness.
But let me take a Siwu here. I think he's been raising his hand for a while. Siwu, how are you? Are you
Hi
here?
guys,
Oh, there we go.
sorry. Yeah, I'm here. Um, okay. So I guess like my question or my thoughts on this, right, is I haven't taken my first trip yet. But I've been interested in taking it, right? And I've been doing my research. Probably closer to the last 2 years, I would say. I think right now for me, really what's like holding me back is just the set. Like the like having the time and the place to do it because like I just don't want to do it at my house or something because like I've kind of come to understand that like when you take these substances, right, it's like it's not like just you're getting high, it's like an actual endeavor, right? It's an actual trip. So my question is like, would listening to like certain music um like affect that trip? Would it like I don't know, even be beneficial? Would it hurt it? Um, I just kind of wanted to get thoughts on that aspect.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're talking about LSD or psilocybin. For me,
Like the natural stuff, not LSD,
okay,
like anything
cool,
anything natural. Yeah.
cool. Yeah. So for me, um, I've done it in multiple settings. My first time was just in my apartment, all alone, hanging out, and then um, that was cool. But my most fun experiences have been in nature, places that I'm comfortable with, and I found that the music of nature was the most therapeutic for my trip. So it was like the middle of summer, and summers in Michigan are actually quite beautiful. I'd put it up against any part of the country, honestly. But the birds were singing, the crickets, everything. Just the sounds of nature were music enough for me. In terms of other types of music, I would just be very, very careful personally, because as Brian touched on, you are tapping into like an expanded sense of consciousness. So you might become aware of different elements within those songs or within that music that you weren't aware of before. And that could really affect you in different ways. I'm not saying you should steer clear of music. That's just something you feel out personally. When you experience the mushroom trip or whatever substance that you're going to experience, you'll understand and you'll kind of go with it, um, in a sense that you might intend fully to do one thing and you do something else, while you're experiencing it. So you might go in intending to listen to your favorite song, and that could be beneficial for you, but you might not even want to. You might not feel inclined at all. So I think it's very personal, and it really depends on what your intention is, um, when seeking that endeavor.
And by the
For
way,
sure.
nature, like I think we've touched upon, like Bogey started touching upon this, and Jaime just mentioned this. You want the best advice I can give you in this? It is nothing to do with psychedelics or natural sources like that. It is developing the proper meditation practice and reconnecting with nature. By learning to grow that inner awareness and dropping the noise and the distractions and learning to reside in that sacred space of your own sanctity of consciousness, so you can really become aware of who you are, and you can start letting go of all the things that you think you are, and you start to experience who you really are. And nature is a great source because it provides, as Jaime was alluding to, If we pay attention, the problem is nature has been degraded in many areas. It provides and was designed to stimulate the mind in a particular way to induce these higher states of consciousness. And therefore, I invite you to explore that, whether it's with the psychedelics or not. And in future sessions, we can discuss, the more meditation, the reconnecting with nature side. That is, it helps you to really build a solid base, and is the main tool. 100%, I'll say this, is the main tool to transcend both body and mind, and to really experience who you really are. It's the greatest gift you could ever give yourself. Let's give okay, Siwi, I want you to reply, and then we'll take Anna has been waiting for a while. Go ahead. If you wanted to just comment or mention anything about what was said.
No, for sure. I think that's great advice. Just because how do you say? I think for me, right? I think my anxiety, my fear was always like the stigma that's around it per se, like not knowing. I think was my thing. I think now that I'm talking about it, I'm doing research and trying to just kind of set up having that right mindset, right? So I guess now I'm just like looking more into like the set and setting, but no, I totally agree. I mean, I don't know if this would have to do anything with it, but I smoke weed. I'm a pretty avid smoker, and I've had like when I'm really high, like where I do that, kind of trying to connect with nature and be with nature, and I've kind of had like that feeling of like, oh yes, like I love nature, and, like I listen to everything. I'm a musician, so like I'm always picking out different stuff in music. So, as you were saying, like nature's music or whatever, right? Um, I was able to kind of like pick out the different stuff. So I don't know if that's like a sign, like I'm like I can't even find the word for it, like that. Like I'm trying to not understand, but like kind of just having like that right mindset. I don't know if that would help in my endeavor of psychedelics or not.
No, yeah, for sure. Like it takes a certain like level of maturity. I think a lot of the problems arise in younger generations that sometimes dabble in things where they're not prepared. Like if you listen to when Jaime was talking, listen to the level of like how methodical he was, and how he was very careful, and he almost like he was very well researched. Same thing with Austin when he was talking about like he was looking into it and all this. If you want to do and you're interested, then if you feel like you're ready, then yeah, I feel like if you're saying you're in the right mindset, then make sure that you're doing it in a safe area, because um, oftentimes there's a lot in the universe, in the physical world. Overlaying the physical world, there's a whole bunch of invisible things that you don't see. And you don't want to open the door too wide, and all of a sudden you have too much intake that could affect you negatively. And that's why nature is so perfect. This is why shamans like do things in a natural setting, because it's in communion with Mother Nature that you really start to kind of find and reconnect with who you really are. Let's see, Anna, I want to bring you up because you've been waiting patiently. How are you?
Hello, everyone. I'm fine. Well, about the first experience, I would recommend what you said, Bebe, preparation, and that means for me meditating like at least a month or 21 days before you have the experience. Meditate every day. If you have the chance to go to nature and really like take the wisdom from nature before, connect with nature before. And as Bebe said, I don't know if I pronounced it well, I'm sorry. But as he said, I think that when you like preparate yourself, you will have a better experience. And also you will notice like more of the changes in yourself and in your outside world if you prepare in nature before. I did that for my first experience with mushrooms. I didn't know I was gonna have mushrooms. I was going through a very hard time, and I really devoted myself to meditation, like a month before. And that day it was full moon. I was in Miami visiting my sister. We were on the beach, and there was a full moon circle. So someone was like playing some instrument like percussion, and well, the moon was beautiful, reflecting in the sea. And a friend of my sister had golden teachers. I would recommend those for your first trip, since those are very easy on beginners. And I would recommend not such a big dose. I took 1.5 cups, and I really had a very beautiful experience. And not just that, after that, I am a visual artist, and at that time I was just learning to draw and like to paint. And after that trip, something happened, and what I was drawing and painting was like I was practicing, like, I don't know, years. Like, it was shocking for me, and I think it's not me. What, like something I opened to something, and I'm receiving this like information in the form of art from some source. I opened to some source. So you will, as you're a musician, I think you will get a really um like something that really like changes what you do in a good way, and connects you with something that makes you appreciate it and enjoy it more.
Yeah.
For
I
sure.
would just quickly. Okay. Yeah. C will be sorry. Sorry. Go for it. If
No,
there's
no, no.
something
It's all
that you
good.
want to say.
Real quick, just what was the name of the substance that you said? Just so I can do more research on it, because I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, is golden teacher the name of the mushroom? Golden, l-
Uh-huh.
like golden teacher.
Teacher,
Yeah,
like my teacher,
golden
fifth
teacher.
Golden
grade teacher,
teacher.
right?
Hmm.
Hey Anna, you were in my neck of the woods. I live in Miami. Nice to meet you. Yeah, it is Bebe. You speak Spanish, Anna?
Yeah, I'm from Colombia. Nice to meet you, bebe. Gusto en
Nice, nice.
conocerte.
Igualmente. Yeah, you made some excellent points. And one of the things that I forgot that you mentioned before, we let's unwind this down because we're already going on 1 hour and 40. We'll take DT's last comment, and then we'll wrap it up. But I wanted to mention, in terms of dosage, Anna mentioned something very important. This is why researching is important. It applies also to cannabis. If you really wanted to unlock the healing component, especially for cannabis, and we can talk about a later point, having it in a more natural state, an oil tincture would be helpful, because, or some sort of way in which you can dose it more appropriately. This is why, as she was mentioning, with regards to, I think it was a mushroom, you made like a tea, I think it was, and she drank a cup. Like, you want to like start slow and then gradually increase it where you reach a certain sweet spot. Because if you take too much, it could lead to an experience that may not be stable. You may not feel good, and that may be underlying what may have happened to DT's friend. And so, if you start small, and let's say you don't have much of an effect, maybe you just feel really relaxed, you kind of microdose, then fine. Okay, maybe I can tolerate a bit more. And you turn it up and you turn it up and turn it up until you get to a point where you start having experiences, things start to unveil, and you're able to process it. And you're like, okay, I can handle a little bit more. And that's what you want. You want the skill of turning the dial just right, because remember, this is really changing your frequency. It's making your nervous system resonate at a different frequency. And the other thing that I found, and I would highly recommend, is hydration. Is the most important thing, because when you're hydrating, there's something about water that gets consumed very quickly. And so the more you have, I would have like lots of water, have hot water like right by you, and just keep hydrating yourself. It will allow the experience to be sustained more consistently without kind of going a little bit off and burnout, or maybe starting to feel like you're yawning and struggling, which can happen with cannabis. So those would be some of my suggestions. If anybody has any final points, let's try to wrap it
Yes.
up there.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna
Can
Oh
correct.
wait,
I
yeah,
think
go ahead.
because of my pronunciation, I said 1.5 cup, and you understood like like if I'm gonna have a cup of coffee. No, what I said is cup, CAP, 1.5
Oh, a
cups.
cap of cap of
Yeah,
monks.
I'm
I see.
sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe my pronunciation. Yeah, I think it's important because it worked for me, and I think it was more like you said, like a micro dose. So it was very relaxing and unifying with nature.
Oh, and by the way, in a future session, if you wanted to discuss that element that you just mentioned about that you felt you were tapping into something, we can go into details about what exactly that is and how to enhance that, etc. So we can do that in a future session. DT, let's take your final comment question, then we'll let Bogey wrap it up. Maybe we'll let Bogey lead a little om to close it out. All right, DT, go ahead, friend.
Okay, thank you. So basically, see what I'm directing to you. So, my guy, you need water, you need chewing gums. Like those have helped me like sober up in moments of like when I wasn't having a very good trip and I was scared for like different reasons to not go through the trip, like take something in cases of emergency that you think that they may help you sober up, and you can literally search on Google and like there's a lot of stuff. But one thing that you need to know is to not be afraid when you do it. If you go with a doubt in your head that this gonna happen to me or that gonna happen to me, you're gonna have problems during the trip. Like you're gonna be scared, like it won't be the right effect of the thing, and like you will be terrified. You won't love them, you won't, I don't know. And you just need, like as Anna said, like to free your mind from everything and to be like in the best conscious way, till the best, like to not have any problems ongoing, or even if you have any problems, you just leave them right there and you focus on the thing and you just enjoy the thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just quickly say something about that. Because what I just thought is, it can also be a trap to say that you should not be afraid. You should not experience this or that. Because when you do so, and this might very well be the case, right? Things might come to the surface that you would not have expected would come to the surface. And amongst other things, that will be fear, that will be anger, that will be all sorts of things, right? The most important thing is how it's not. I learned from my precious teachers, and this is I will be forever thankful for this, because this is so simple yet so profound. It doesn't matter. It's not about the emotion. It's not about the thought itself. A thought is just a thought. An emotion is just an emotion. How we relate to these things is what makes the difference, right? So, do we have an aversive attitude towards our emotions and our thoughts, right? So, as soon as a thought arises, as soon as an emotion arises, how do we react? That is what matters. So, it's not a bad thing to experience anger. It's not a bad thing to experience fear, right? It's only bad because we have grown accustomed to it, to have an aversive attitude towards emotions and thoughts to push them away. Our aversion is what causes us suffering. It's not the thought, it's not the emotion, it's our aversion. And that's why, and that is totally dependent on the individual level of the practitioner. How experienced are you with your mind? Are you able to deal with anger, with fear in a constructive way? Are you able to let go of it as soon as it arises? Well, perfect. Then you might even welcome problems because you know how to deal with them. If you are very uncertain personally, as soon as such an emotion arises and you kind of freak out, which is also okay to do that, right? It just really much depends on our individual spiritual level. But then it's more important to tweak your circumstances in such a way that this won't necessarily be part of the experience. But even if that arises, it's very important that you learn to accept that and to welcome it, because that's when you make friends. The only reason why we suffer is because we are fighting our emotions, we're fighting our thoughts.
That's the key. The real source of stress and suffering is resistance. When I encounter something, I may attach to it if it's something that I have grown to think I like and I want in my life, and I reject other things that I don't. It's all this part of the same continuous spectrum. Don't fight any experience. Allow it to flow through you freely. Become like this kind of pure filtering device that just allows anything to go through it. And when it's no longer there, you let it go. You take what it's trying to teach you, you look at it, and you don't judge it and say it's something scary or it's something unpleasant or it's making me cry. It's just an experience. If you need to cry, you cry. If you need to laugh, you laugh. There's no difference between laughing and crying. When you listen to the sounds your body produces when laughing and crying, they are very similar. And so it's just how we identify with them that makes us sometimes rebel against them. So just go with calmness and serenity, be methodical, do some study, take a day where you've actually, like Anna was saying, build up to it, practice some relaxing stuff, commune with nature, meditate, eat healthy, get yourself in a really good state, fill your conscious space with a lot of good stuff so that when you go in there, you're better prepared for what's to come. So Bogey, let's finish it off with, do we want to finish it off with an om? I know Austin.
Yeah, we can do that.
If you want to do it at home, that's fine. You don't have to be in voice. Just exhale completely. Take a deep breath. May you have an awesome evening or day wherever you may be. I love you all. Hopefully we'll meet one day in person. Namaste, and stay tuned for announcements for the next episode of Shattering the Taboo podcast. Peace out.
See ya.
Love you guys. Peace.